Get started. So today's seminar is hosted by the Berkeley Pharma Foundation. My name is Ban Luan Nguyen, and I'm the president of the foundation. Our mission is to increase access for scientists and entrepreneurs in the biotech industry through education, mentorship, and professional opportunities. To drive meaningful impact, we have set clear goals. Within the next 3 months, we aim to organize an in-person conference to gain visibility. Within 2 years, we plan to launch and fund a research program for scientists and entrepreneurs. And within 5 years, we aspire to establish a cutting-edge scientific laboratory in Berkeley, California. Berkeley Pharma Foundation is dedicated to educating and empowering scientists and entrepreneurs through our speaker series, where industry leaders share insights on cutting-edge biotech innovations, career development, and entrepreneurship. Our goal is to bridge the gap between scientific discovery and real-world impact. To get involved, follow us on LinkedIn for updates. Stay tuned for our upcoming seminars and conferences, and feel free to reach out to me to explore more ways to engage with our mission. Today, we're thrilled to welcome our speaker, Jami Taylor, MBA, IRC, a seasoned strategist based in Silicon Valley who helps biotech and medtech companies secure investor interest and navigate high-risk initiatives. With deep experience in biopharma and medtech, she has played a key role in advancing new technologies and delivery models across global markets. In today's discussion, Jami will share insights on how startups can effectively engage investors, communicate their value, and build confidence in a rapidly evolving biotech landscape. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to an engaging and insightful discussion. And with that, Jami, I will pass the mic on to you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for hosting, and I'm thrilled to see all of you. In fact, this is the perfect size of a group for us to have, I think, a really rich discussion. Certainly feel free to put questions in the chat. It's my understanding that we'll move through some of the baseline information that I'll share and then have the opportunity to have some back and forth Q&A. I also have a backup set of slides where we can walk through, if there's time, some interesting, very recent success stories where we can discern and distill some key takeaways that might confer additional value. So let's kick off because there's a lot to cover. Obviously, today we're covering investor engagement strategies and obviously a challenging biotech market and looking at strategies to secure visibility, confidence, and of course, capital. So the key themes of our discussion today will really center on, one, the backdrop that we're all up against as innovators in the biotech arena and medtech arena inclusive of that. And really looking, I hope, with a very clear eye or clear set of eyes at the challenging capital markets environment and what we might be able to expect of the future, both on the private side and the public side, with, as I mentioned, a look at some of the key exceptions that might drive us in certain directions strategically and will be of key use. I will really double down on the notion throughout this discussion that it's time to think and operate differently. It's very possible that the biotech sector has experienced a fundamental shift, one that may be irreversible, that requires a very different level of action at the very least from innovators who are moving the field forward. And I think all of us bring a certain sense of mission and conviction with respect to biotech and its importance. And those of you who are here and listening beyond this setting, I think we can all agree that it's time for leadership and time to consider other ways to navigate these rocky waters that may remain with us for quite some time. Now, how are we to best approach the road ahead? That will be the crux of our discussion here. I'll share with you some of my perspectives, certainly from sort of the trenches in this environment, offer you a look at some of the common mistakes at play and ways that you can avoid those, and then how we can look at how we can draw upon best practices and even some creative approaches to succeed in your own investor relations strategies. So just a quick introduction, Van Loan, you gave a wonderful one. I'll just give you a sense of some of the companies I've worked with in the investor relations arena. Some of these might be familiar to you. Some have been acquired. Some are very much fighting through next capital raises. Some are still in stealth, and some occupy really interesting new directions in medicine, including drug device combinations, even animal health, and so forth. Under the broad umbrella of the Health Innovation Exchange, I work with startups from around the world, connecting them to capital and to resources, and love to see them thrive. That's been a phenomenal organization, one centered in Geneva. And of course, other global organizations like Johnson & Johnson represented here, where I was very much incubated for the better part of my career. So setting the stage for today's discussion, we want to look at this current state for biotech capital markets. It's almost tough to see some of this data. And I think it's fair to claim that from here onward in our lifetimes, we may never again see a market environment for biotech that resembles what we saw just a few years ago in that 2020-2021 timeframe. One indicator among many, and we'll cover a few more, is US biotech IPO issuance. This is a key signal, and we've seen a plummeting thereof. And I think it's important for us to recognize this in part because the IPO markets really create that incentive for those of you who sit within the private markets now. And there have been different ways that companies have managed this, but obviously it's represented almost its own brick wall to companies that probably need to go public and deserve to go public, but cannot, given the state of the current environment, one that seems even weaker this week versus where it was 5 weeks ago. So watching it very closely, watching this signal in particular, I think is important as we move forward, recognizing that there are exceptions. And so for the glimmers of optimism that we might be able to harness, I think there's value in recognizing that, of course, we're in a new age with respect to what some are calling tech bio, the sort of tech takeover of biotech, or that sort of inversion with the application of AI, of course. And we've seen companies really win in that regard. And we've seen lots of optimistic statements from all kinds of scions, Larry Ellison, Sam Altman, and others, really suggesting that the great benefits of the current state with respect to AI and its promise, the great benefits will lie in its intersection with biology. So recognizing that and recognizing that there's capital being deployed in that direction can help us consider how we frame up our own offerings on an individual basis in your own respective spheres. Other data points of note are, of course, the fact that we're seeing historically low valuations in the sector. One particularly challenging piece is just the sheer number of companies that are operating below market values, but with market values lower than their cash reserves, rather. And we've seen also record high restructurings and bankruptcies and layoffs, representing this financial stress and how it's spread across the industry. A great resource to track this, although it may bring a tear to your eyes, is the Fierce Biotech Layoff Tracker. You see, even just from yesterday, this expression of hope in the first sentence of the Layoff Tracker's presentation, and recognition that biopharma layoffs continue to escalate, and then a listing thereof. Definitely a great resource as you're getting a sense of the state of play in the industry. For those that are looking for opportunities to pick up assets that are being potentially abandoned in distressed companies, this is also a great resource for you to think creatively in that regard. Now, here comes that sense of where we might position ourselves broadly in terms of our mentality toward the market. I think there are advantages at this point to adopting a more pessimistic view for the future, in part because I saw left and right between 2022 and 2024 a sense among strong management teams that we simply needed to wait out the biotech winter. And there were a lot of voices from a lot of stages suggesting that it was simply a matter of cyclicality. Biotech would be back. One of the most prominent health economists in the country stood up at the June 2023 Bio International Convention and said that with almost near complete certainty, the biotech markets would be roaring again as of the first half of 2024. We did not see that, of course. And the challenge is, from my point of view, A lot of these strong management teams lost an important amount of time as they sat back, did not engage with the right level of action, did not engage capital markets, alternative sources of funding potentially, and so forth, and really thought we can wait this out. And now those same management teams and companies are facing that financial distress that we're seeing so starkly captured in the Fierce Biotech Layoff Tracker and so forth. So taking this more cynical lens, I think can ignite the right level of action. And that's part of why we're here, to figure out what that right level of action and type of action might entail. So just to give a little bit more context, I thought there was a great blog post on just sort of explaining this new biotech funding reality. And I'm glad they used the term reality, and gave that sense of gravity to it and almost permanence to it. And here you see some pretty stark numbers that speak to just what a boom time and a bubble 2021 represented versus where we are today, and the shift underway that's requiring, and here's the key word here, companies to adapt. Here we are, all of us, in a position of adaptation, and players that adapt most readily, whether it's their development plans or strategies more broadly or otherwise, at those that adapt with the greatest degree of facility and take, I think, the greatest degree of action in this regard, will win what is proving to be a true survival of the fittest type of contest. So many of you have probably read this article. It's certainly made the rounds in the industry. Adam Feuerstein, stat, bemoaning with a lot of powerful data this dark place that biotech is in. Some of you may have seen that just this morning he issued another article saying that biotech is in an even darker place relative to the 3 weeks. Within the 3 weeks since this first article was published, he's seen an even bleaker mood and even stronger signals of continued downturn. He emphasizes this chart, and it's worth noting. Look at the comparison here over the last 5 years, and you can see how generalists especially would stay far away from biotech. The sense that the XBI has accomplished what he describes in no uncertain terms as nothing. What's hard to see within this chart, of course, is what we all know, and that there is terrific and even transformational science being incubated that needs capital to be able to advance. And the fear is that we could enter a sort of lost age where all of the scientific discovery and true advancements that surged in 2021. Some players, of course, really should be shaken out, but there are real glimmers of huge opportunity here of meeting unmet needs like never before and providing patients with optionality, new therapeutic paradigms and options that some of these options, many in fact, may never see the light of day because of the state of play that's illustrated in this and other charts, of course. This goes back to the Feuerstein article from February 13th, again, punctuated further in his article out this morning. But he speaks to this sentiment in the public markets, which of course has its own spillover to the private markets. And he speaks to this number of publicly traded biotech companies, many of them trading below cash, as he mentions, and has since this article coined the term biotech zombies, which you could argue has its own sort of negative spiral effect on how the industry is perceived. Where the industry goes from here is an open question. Where you go from here as a leader within the industry presents opportunities to you where you can see the landscape with clear eyes. So the current environment demands that biotech innovators operate differently to compete for capital, and the competition is fierce for capital, and that is really point and pillar number one. Leaders must work harder than ever before and engage more creatively with investors versus what the 2021 period required. I'll speak more about this, but this is a real point of, in my view, sadness and frustration. There are a lot of biotech leaders who were really molded and elevated in the 2021 context when capital flowed freely. And because they were able to access capital so easily, many of them in the tens of millions of dollars and more, even with small startups and really fly-by-night ideas, many of them didn't didn't incubate themselves in an environment that required this level of effort, and they're finding themselves flummoxed today as they need to go to keep their companies alive, really enter a very different and arguably very bloody arena. So how do you build your playbook? At first, with all the cynicism that I've advocated you adopt, I suggest that you can secure capital in this environment. Really take that streak of optimism, make sure that it is harnessed to an action orientation, and there are ways to build your playbook. It will take work, it will take homework, it will take really getting out there, and we'll talk about some strategies to make sure that you have a playbook that's constructed appropriately and actualized. This is the first step, though, knowing that you need a playbook. Again, capital will likely not be flowing to you in any sort of organic way. You have to have a strategy, and it's important at this juncture as your clinical development strategy and all else that occupies the obligations of a strong management team and set of leaders. So here is a great resource for you. And again, we can walk through some of these case studies. This was published just this week and it is published on typically a monthly basis, the Fierce Biotech Fundraising Tracker. You see some really impressive gains and grabs, to use the term used here in the headline. Here is where I think you can find some tremendous inspiration as you move through this article, and hopefully some of you have already read it. You can see case study examples handed to you on a silver platter with linked press releases that give you clear glimpses into what investors are funding right now. Many of those press releases contain quotes from those who led rounds, for example, and in those quotes, you will find treasure troves of explanation as to why this particular investment opportunity was attractive to the particular lead. And so making sure that as part of your playbook, you do the fundamental research, starting with these types of case studies, you're setting yourselves on solid ground to be able to move forward with a strong set of knowledge in hand and a sense of how to target and prioritize. So look to these and similar developments closely for clues. That's point number one. And then there's the importance of perceived momentum. And this is really tough for companies that made their debuts in 2021, some beforehand, and perhaps are getting ready to or already entering the capital markets environment for more capital, but perhaps are perceived as having low momentum, or what I'll just call euphemistically history. One example might be a company that raised $50 million at the drop of a hat when capital was flowing freely, cost of capital was low, enthusiasm for a particular modality or approach was high. Maybe that was even 2018, 2019, and certainly your 2020 or 2021. And yet maybe some of what was expected in terms of progress between a Series A and a Series B didn't quite materialize. There was so much money flowing so readily to biotechs at that time that you had a little bit of profligacy on the part of more than a few management teams. Young companies, first-time CEOs who went out and bought big houses in ritzy suburbs of Boston, for example, or maybe those that didn't know really how to build a clinical development strategy and siphoned all of their resources into maybe a preponderance of animal studies that gave some greater sense of scientific potential, but didn't really move the needle and certainly didn't demonstrate leaps forward in leadership. So know that perceived momentum is really important. And what that does is, in this environment, it's giving companies that are new a distinct advantage. So if you have been born in this difficult crucible of difficult capital markets, you're really perceived to be in many ways stronger than those that were born even 5 to 8 or more years ago. And where you may have some history, so to speak, where that may be an issue for your company, take a look at that very honestly. You can bring in someone like me or others to carry out an anonymous or objective perception study to help you understand why you might be hitting brick walls at this point, and really consider calibrating. If you need to replace a CEO or a CMO, or if you need to retool in a very hard and efficient way your clinical development strategy, if you need to change your therapeutic area, or if you need to even change your brand and your company name, really consider that this is the time for hard decisions around that. For those of you that are just starting your companies today, again, you may have a distinct advantage, in part because you may be more open to incorporating certain trends. And I've talked with a lot of management teams feeling very frustrated because as core scientists, they really resist trends, but they matter. If capital is flowing in certain directions, there's often a lemmings effect, a bandwagon effect within the investor community. And so it's really important to even ask, is there a way that we can build some sort of quantum computing element into our original strategy? Can we overlay this with some sort of new tech to demonstrate that we understand where this field is going? So just really be willing to have these hard discussions. I've seen a lot of stubbornness lately and refusal to really accept the importance of pivoting, but especially if if you had maybe an imperfect use of funds, or have reputationally are seen as slower, for example, or just not on the truly the front edge of the frontiers of innovation at this moment. Look for ways to get there. It matters. I would argue, and this probably goes without saying, but it's a very unforgiving environment at the moment. And so, take that and apply it with humility. So some of the essential principles as we think about a playbook that you can actualize, and some of these stand to reason, but it's really important to emphasize them as foundational pieces. One is to know and be known. Know your investors and be known to them. Know your current and prospective investors and be known to them. One challenge I see thinking about that subset that I described to you of companies that were high flying and capturing capital left and right in 2020, 2021, many of them went to do what they're good at, which is focusing on building a company, staying close to their clinical studies and so forth, but they didn't continue the conversation and keep relationships intact. Some went dark enough that I mean, I can give you an example of a company that was a high flyer and had gone, so sort of into its own cave to do its work without really leaning forward and being known and externally recognized. And unfortunately, it put the company at a disadvantage, so much so that people assumed that the company had quietly gone under. Or when they were ready to make their rounds with capital again, they simply didn't have the name recognition to get any real resonance, and they were starting from a deficit. So we'll talk more about that, and certainly I can provide some advice there to anyone looking at it. Of course, biotech leaders are almost notorious for introversion, and there's certainly value to that, and there's a character of the field that's there's a character sort of aspect to that that's very endearing. Unfortunately, this is the moment where to know and be known is a must. And so some of that means really getting out of a shell, and it's tough. At the same time, of course, remember that the strengths of your science team, the commercial opportunity, your competitive environment, your overall strategy, all of that matters above all else. If you don't have a strong investable story and company, if the state of your science is weak relative to new entrants, for example, and if the commercial opportunity is slipped for whatever reason, you may just, you will not be in a position to capture capital, certainly not to compete for it even. And this is where that retooling is so important, to make sure that you're in the strongest position possible at the fundamental business level to be able to put your best foot forward. So we'll start here with the know and be known. And now more than ever, as I've emphasized, it's important to know your prospective investors. This allows you to target, prioritize, and personalize your outreach in what is not inefficient in the immediate term, but is ultimately more efficient for you, so that you're not spinning wheels. And this means striving for a deep and detailed knowledge. And this is really the piece that, in my view, separates strong competitors for capital versus those that are weak. And weak, to make this more tangible, weak entails buying a list of 1,000 investors in biotech, spamming the list, and it's called spray and pray, and hoping for a response. This deep and detailed knowledge can help you to know exactly where to go. And that means, of course, understanding a firm's respective investment thesis, their assets under management, their preferred check sizes, their recent and historical track records, and much more. I would argue even researching to the point of having an in-depth understanding, an in-depth knowledge of the interests of individual gatekeepers and decision makers at these firms. That means knowing who went to what school, studied under what PhD advisor, who wrote their dissertation on what topics, who has soft power within a firm versus hard power, where they sit organizationally, and so on and so forth. That means really getting to know them and identifying points of intersection. For example, if you are an alumni of a particular school program, all studies show, and certainly my own observation, that will open doors for you with other alums in the investment circles with success higher than almost any other point of commonality. I would argue that although some of this information seems elusive, here we are in the information age, and if you take the time, you can connect with investors very differently and with huge success. And I can cite many examples. It's worth it to do this homework. And of course, you can draw forward areas of clear common interest as you engage. And again, ultimately, this is more efficient. And your willingness to curate this information and align your investor engagement strategy to it demonstrates the respect that is required of biotech leaders in the current environment. And this is a huge shift. Many of us will remember that scene out of The Social Network, where a young Mark Zuckerberg is coached in a way where perhaps he does not show up showing the most respect to investors. I can tell you that biotech leaders do not have that latitude in this environment to show anything but total deference. This is very difficult from a sort of a power structure point of view. And of course, many founders are iconoclasts and really chafe at this notion. But I've seen even minor shows of disrespect really erupt into crises for different firms. Anecdotally, one management team I worked for had a CEO who had quite the sense of humor. We were sitting with an MD PhD from Harvard who was making key decisions for a very well-heeled investor, biotech only, so really important niche player that had a strong interest in the company. It was Movember, otherwise known as November, celebrating prostate cancer awareness. And one of the young men at the table had a mustache in recognition of this. And the CEO turned to this MD PhD from Harvard, sitting next to the mustached man, and said, "Well, I don't think you could ever grow a mustache if you tried." Of course, this was his awkward sense of humor. There was a little bit of damage control, but this particular individual was clearly very offended. There was a high degree of chaos that faced this particular company over the next months, really driven by, this was a publicly traded company, a degree of short attack, short selling, and other challenges that came unprovoked and seemed to be a great mystery. Then the SEC announced an investigation against this company and its management team, which seemed to come out of nowhere. Ultimately, after many thousands of dollars spent on lawyers, a huge loss in market value, et cetera, guess who was behind all of it? This particular firm and that particular offended individual at the table, offended over what had been an offhand casual remark that showed a degree of disrespect. And the perception thereof drove a level of aggression that this firm was in some ways uniquely positioned to assert. And it certainly spoke to the state of play in the current environment. Respect it goes without saying, but respect at a level that would make your parents proud is really par for the course, even among very seasoned leaders who might consider them, and with great science, who might consider themselves or deserving of latitude. So it's also important to be known, and this is really important and very tough in this environment. There are lots of very noisy platforms. I think the hardest thing that many leaders face right now is the fact that there are just so many other voices in biotech that are competing for the spotlight, competing for attention. And of course, we all know certain platforms like LinkedIn and so forth. It's useful to really look beyond that. Look for the growing number and really high quality podcasts, for example, in the biotech space. We were struggling with one of my clients to really get them the attention and traction that they were hoping to get in known outlets like Endpoints and Stat and so forth. We started doing the biotech circuit, and we were able to be in a position to really get the traction we needed, which ultimately culminated in more attention from some of the bigger life science leaders and so forth. So look for some of these alternative media sources and pitch them assiduously. This is going to put you in a position where you can be a known quantity and be searchable. So it's not that every investor is sitting next to his or her iPhone looking at Spotify playlists left and right, but when they search you and when they go to make it a case for investment in your company, it helps to have a whole archive and library that they can bring that shows that you have put yourself out there. Investors want to work with management teams that demonstrate a certain relentlessness when it comes to attracting attention and capital. And I can't tell you how many investor meetings I've been in, even in the last few months, where the major point of advice from investors has been not around the science or regulatory strategy or any of those like sort of typical biotech business model elements. The conversation's been about PR. It's been about website quality. It's been about LinkedIn presence and follower numbers. This has really struck me. And especially as we see more, quote unquote, Gen Z and so forth, investors really rise in the ranks at respective firms. This is becoming a must have and a must do, even though some of us who are, very tied to science, and science only might chafe at this. It's simply the new reality. And I want to really emphasize investor conferences with you because this is where you can get a critical mass of biotech investors known to be clustered together. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, and I can certainly walk you through how to approach investor conferences. But this bucket is the big miss among many, many players, both on the private, early stage side, even late stage side, where you have a known critical mass of biotech investors. I want you to physically be there too. And some are virtual, of course, and some are paid opportunities, and they vary in quality. And I can certainly follow up with any of you who are curious about which to pursue. I'm sure you're chased by, many different paid opportunities, some of which are worthwhile, many of which are not. But where there's a bona fide biotech investor conference, this is, again, where I want to see you congregating alongside biotech investors. And this is where if there's anything you take away from today, it's the tack-on strategy that I hope you'll consider and I hope you'll deploy. So here's the art of the tack-on. Identify where a critical mass of biotech investors will be, and there are many other places beyond JP Morgan in San Francisco in January. You strive for proximity. So even if you're not invited to, say, the Jefferies conference, healthcare conference in June in New York, I've had huge success where recognizing that many investors are there, that most investor meetings end at about 4:00, situating a CEO and management team that hasn't participated and wasn't invited, situating them in the Marriott Marquis in Times Square hotel restaurant, and inviting investors to swing by and meet us there as they're packing up for the day. This has led to some of the biggest investments and some of the closest relationships that I've seen. It's a stroke of genius that very few companies will understand as such. And this is where you can really win. Also, setting up even small investor cocktail receptions. The Bank of America healthcare conferences in Las Vegas in May, for example. If your cousin lives in Las Vegas and is willing to open up their living room, even intimate settings like that can be a way for you to invite investors to swing by, enjoy even a homemade hors d'oeuvre cookie, and interact for just a few minutes. I've done this in many different settings. Many people like shy away from this type of approach, thinking that it's very expensive, when we live in an age of Gigster and other platforms that can allocate space to us and allow for reservations of space very easily and very cheaply, and can set you up for success and for really important interactions. You can always be there for informal meetups, and of course, one-on-one meetings over breakfast or coffee. And even the host venue lobby can provide opportunities for proximity. I was at the Wells Fargo conference not too long ago, and seeing a few very sharp, very savvy CEOs sitting in the lobby. They hadn't been invited to the conference proper, but they were able to have those touch points with key investors, many of them recognizable, many of them easy to know via the playbook, lookbook, that because they've done their homework, putting themselves in the proximity of these key niche firms, of which there's a limited universe, put them in a position where they could have concrete opportunities to pitch, make connections, and then be able to put themselves at the forefront of the capital competition game. Those of you who in any way expect to be able to win capital in today's environment via Zoom or, as I mentioned, spam emails, it just doesn't work. I wish it did, because that's a lot easier. You'll have those Zoom interactions or opportunities, especially if you get turned down for any of these invitations you might send out. Going above and beyond, and again, putting yourself in proximity will put you in a great position to win. So what are some of those concretely? This is a screenshot from my Excel spreadsheet just for this month alone, right? We've had TD Cowen already, very well known, buzz at TD Cowen every year in Boston. Great place to spend time in a lobby or at one of the nearby coffee shops. Coming up just next week, many of you might know or not, but Miami has really tried to establish itself as the new JP Morgan. And it has been doing this for the last couple of years and very successfully attracting a whole suite of really important investor conferences. If you're looking to capture capital, Miami next week is an absolutely phenomenal place to be, and plenty of low dollar, very easy ways to be in touch with some of the best biotech and healthcare and medtech investors on the planet who will be congregating there en masse. And it's such a great opportunity. I would highly recommend that you don't miss it. You see other things happening. A lot of investment banks have now set up ski trips. Stifel has a famous one. The next one you see, Vail, Colorado, TD Cowen. Those tend to be very, very cozy places. And again, even if you're not staying at the Deer Valley in Park City, for example, where Stifel often has its conference, you can go there and invite someone to meet you at the bar, or a whole set of people to meet you at dinner at the hotel restaurant, below. And it's time and a small investment very well spent, especially because people tend to be much more casual and happy and open when they're in settings like this. You can see others, of course, on this list. And then here, and of course, they don't end. I mentioned May is another big month. I mentioned Bank of America in Las Vegas, certainly a short and cheap trip for those of us coming from the Bay Area. There are some other new conferences cropping up, like D. Borals. This is paid. Know that where you have a paid conference opportunity, I have never, ever lacked success in negotiating the pricing downward. That pricing is very flexible. And I recently just yesterday negotiated what was a $7,500 spot presentation, 30-minute presentation spot at a paid conference. I got them down to zero. So really know that that's an opportunity for you. And again, strive for proximity here. June, of course, huge. And then you've got bio. You've got a lot of reasons to be places in June. And this is a great time to capture capital. Know that a lot of investors close their books in the November timeframe. And so late end of year capital raising can be extremely difficult. I would never suggest that you launch a raise in that time frame unless you've got something ultra compelling and you've warmed the waters. This early to mid-year phenomenal time, even despite the backdrop, this is historically speaking, and lots of venues, and many of them overlapping, of course. So lots to draw upon. And many easy calls into some of these banks, even to ask for an invitation. They'll love to get to know you, even if they say no. So as we move into the final piece of the talk, and I definitely want to have time for questions, there are a lot of mistakes. Some of them I mentioned, and even given you some sort of case study anecdotal examples around. But here are some that I just wanted to put forward, because sometimes it's almost better to know what not to do as you're shaping your playbook, or is as good as knowing what to do. So we'll walk through the to-dos next, but the biggest mistake I've seen relates to what I mentioned early in the presentation, and that was the fact that there was a big waiting game underway with this sense that biotech markets would have to, as a matter of cyclicality, pick up, and they didn't. And waiting too long before engaging investors is really a recipe for disaster. The hardest calls I'm getting these days are from companies that have been relatively well funded, but then really sat back in that waiting game in that 2023, 2024 time zone, and suddenly they're in a panic, telling me things like, we are going to be insolvent by June, and they never could have imagined it. And that's a matter of not prioritizing and setting in place a concerted set of steps and action, and taking action against those plans, and doing it earlier when it was relatively sunny, at least relative to the darkness, of course, that we're seeing today, and the pan market perspective. Of course, artificially limiting your investor target list, I think, is a huge mistake. I get a lot of calls from companies who say, I want Deerfield, Andreessen, and OrbiMed, and they're almost unwilling to look at other options. There actually are quite a few other options to consider, and I hope that you'll think about alternative sources of financing, even looking, and of course, the NIH picture is very ugly and bleak right now, and let's hope things reverse or turn around in some respect there. But there are, I mean, even foundations, even philanthropists, it's time to get creative. And it's also time to consider that maybe looking at, sort of the non-marquee set might be a good place, if not to start, then at least consider for downstream, depending on how things go with that sort of top tier. Of course, you've got to practice, and that's a given. A lot of people go into their investor engagements without having done proper Q&A. I see the biggest weakness around failure to properly and fully understand your competitive landscape. You have to know, and you'll know this as you do your homework, but your investors have a bird's eye view of the industry. They talk with companies every single day, and they will know who's competing against you, sometimes with greater clarity than you could ever know. Do the work to know your competitive environment. Companies that show that they have a comparable knowledge of the other players out there, and a sense of why they're positively differentiated versus others, they tend to win. And know this too, you really only get one bite at the apple when you roll out your capital raising campaign. And I can't emphasize this enough. Like I had a firm come to me, give me a list of 20 funds that they wanted me to dive into and grab capital out of. It was very clear, even in part because relationships are there, but it was very clear within the first 3 to 5 calls that they'd burned bridges with all 20. They'd made a lot of mistakes, and they were just looking for someone else to sort of, to peer through a different door, right? And to try to reopen that door. But you really can't afford mistakes in this environment. And that means practicing, doing that work. And especially, as I mentioned, knowing your competitor landscape cold. Then, of course, there's under communicating. We talked about this a little bit. I mean, follow up, check in, send updates, show that you're grateful. This is almost channeling some unfortunate dynamics we've seen at the White House level, but say thank you to your investors. I mean, this is in an IR training recently, given the bleakness of the environment. Uh, Thank you notes to investors. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Thank you again for being a shareholder. Providing that assurance is something that can be the bedrock of your successful IR program. I can tell you, I mentioned Riata, for example. Riata went through many ups and downs. I mean, extreme ups and downs as a company. It's an incredible case study that could also be an incredible Hollywood movie. Of course, sold later to Biogen for over $7 billion. The Riata CEO made a point at every possible opportunity to say thank you to investors. He said thank you more than I even thought was merited, and he won on that basis. It matters. And then, of course, refusing to adapt, refusing to adopt trends. I've seen that stubbornness really throw companies in a corner. Really think about how you can pull these trends into the work that you're doing and be creative and, of course, credible about it. And then finally, assuming that relationships alone can secure needed capital, they're important, but the fundamentals of your business, including the viability of your pipeline, matter most. So consider investor feedback a valuable resource. Some of you may find yourselves pulling your hair out. You know that even when you don't get a response, it's a data point, right? See everything as a data point, and the real gift of investor engagement is the level and quality of feedback that you can pull in. And it's important feedback as you listen to the environment. So on the flip side, here are some key points for finding success in your IR efforts. As I mentioned, get out there, and I mean physically get out there. Your steady inflow of outside capital, ensuring your survival and growth, will likely be a result of how willing you are to be visible to investors and physically proximate to them whenever possible. Be the guy that they see on their way into their meetings at the Wells Fargo Investor Conference. Be that person who's almost omnipresent, and that will suggest a certain degree of momentum and will also show that relentlessness that investors want to see, because they want you to be successful and working constantly to reel in others who can buttress the value of your company and see it through to success. And as I mentioned, the feedback piece, listen closely. Show investors that you're responding. I mentioned a recent website conversation. That night, the CFO said, we're getting a new website for the company, and let's have it up by Monday. It was an ambitious timeline, but the impetus was to show the investor that he was listening, that the company would be responsive and dynamically so with the market. And that shows a fundamental orientation that investors respond positively to. And finally, bring in experts to help you build and execute a successful IR strategy. There's a huge amount of work involved, but also experience that can help take the load off your shoulders as you hopefully find space appropriately for doing what you do best, which is ripening terrific science that can meet patients' needs in the future. So with that, I'll close out and open it up for questions. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Jami. So everyone, if you have questions for Jami, please put them in the chat and I will read them out to Jami to answer. So from Mike McCormick, he said, Jami, great content, thanks. For early stage companies in the seed stage who are focused on angel investors, do you think the tech on strategy works?
I actually do. I think you're actually you're at a better position in a lot of ways, because you're a new face. You are a point of intrigue, really, as an early stage player. And the earlier you can get to know this limited universe of biotech specialist investors, the better your chances of securing capital that can support you over the long haul. And the truth is, I mean, what's hard, it's always important and useful to put on the hat of someone who has to go to an investment committee. And if they're advocating for a particular company or investment opportunity, the advocacy can be a very high risk endeavor. So this is why it's important for investors to be able to tell an investment committee, I'm endorsing this direction, I'm advocating for it, I've met this investor, and to be able to, I've met this CEO, and I've spent time with him, and here are my impressions, both in a qualitative sense, right? And then, of course, in terms of, the science and the opportunity. So every touch point that you can muster, like, provides a broader body of evidence that an investor who's advocating for you inside his firm, what he can bring to the table. And the truth is, what gives those people the most, those investors in this context, the most credibility is being able to say, I've got my ear to the ground, I'm closest to the hottest opportunities, and I'm bringing something new to the table, an uncovered, new emerging opportunity, sort of, and not even a hidden gem, but a new gem, that's recently landed in the palm, in my palm, right? And know that on the flip side, anyone who advocates for you at an investment committee level and is able to secure funding to put into your company, they're under a lot of pressure from that point forward. And I've seen many, many biotech investors individually lose their jobs when they've swung for the fences on behalf of a particular company or management team, and turn out to be wrong, even in the short term. Heads roll, and that's part of why there's this risk aversion. Every show of assurance and every piece, even iota of confidence you can instill, will help them overcome that fundamental risk aversion, which goes to their own job security and reputations. So hopefully that's helpful. Short answer is yes. So Van Loan, could I show some case studies? Because I think, especially as we think about startups early stage, there's some really great case studies from even the last week that I think provide some of these clues. So I'm going to share those to round us out. And then, of course, please feel free to reach out to me with other questions that you have as you think through some of these. So this is just from this Fierce Biotech article that I mentioned to you that just came out yesterday. So I'm going to put this in a full screen mode so that we can look at some of these. Look at that, Garuda Therapeutics, Series A1, $50 million. This, I mean, my heart just seemed to leap out of my chest when I saw this because it was indicative of some of the old days, even some of the older, more dormant names, quieter names over the last few years that have taken slings and arrows and have been on their own deathbeds, like one of the names here on this list of investors. They're showing up and participating. This is really exciting. What's the key takeaway here? And I definitely recommend everybody look up this article. There's no paywall, so definitely do it. Highly differentiated, truly disruptive plays can win in this environment. If you read the full release, you see OrbiMed's Carl Gordon come out swinging, saying this is the type of industry disruption we have been looking for. Truly great technology will win the day. Sybil?
Hello. Can you hear
Hi.
me? Yes. So first, I'm originally, well, I was born in Vevey in Switzerland, and then I lived in Geneva. I did my PhD there. Which company is, you mentioned one is from Geneva. Which one is it?
Oh, the Health Innovation Exchange. So it's set up there, actually a spin out of the World Health Organization.
Okay.
Really designed to drive global connecting of capital to especially underserved, under-recognized founders, and from all corners of the earth. And it's done a phenomenal job really unearthing founders from every corner of the earth. So hopefully that's helpful. Definitely recommend connecting with them, especially if you're an early stage company.
Okay, thank you. I have two more questions.
Right.
So I started to pitch to investors a year ago, about 2 years ago. So I'm rather new in this environment. What I did notice is that most of the investors, at least VCs, but they are looking for traction. So you said to be known, etc. Thank you very much for all your suggestions, recommendations. But again, one major thing is traction, no?
Right, and some of it depends on exactly where you sit. Traction means different things for, say, a company like Garuda, which is, versus maybe a consumer med tech or health tech company, for example. So really, discerning that and looking for ways that, as sort of the word that I've used that maybe more appropriate sort of pan industry is momentum, showing that high momentum and showing that you've got the fundamentals, the state of the science is so compelling, even where you've got even very early preclinical data, any sort of data can represent traction, and if not in a classic sense, but in a really important sort of hook sense, right? And I was recently at a meeting with a venture firm that maybe on this next slide or the next one that said, that at their investment committees now, no one is allowed to bring a company that doesn't show even an N of 1 data, right? They need to show some sort of data beyond early preclinical work, and data wins the day. So hopefully that can, sort of as we interpret traction, and this is a great point where you can probe and ask for feedback. By traction, what do you mean? Do you think, is that the appropriate term in this context? Make sure that they're not misunderstanding your business model. And ask them if momentum is the more appropriate term and what that might entail, and what sort of early data you might be able to conjure and bring, perhaps with non-dilutive funding or other sources, to be able to unlock capital according to their protocols, their scope, their thesis, etc. And just quickly, I'll move through. So, oh, sorry, Sybil, I think you had one more.
Yes, the rich get richer. So you are saying, and it's well known actually, the investors, they don't or they invest more specifically now, or they don't invest as before, but still they get where is the money?
Well, it's there.
Let's keep it.
That is a perfect, segue to this piece, and that's the fact that a lot of investors are de-risking by launching their own companies with the capital that they have. They're placing them under their own umbrellas, and they're taking investors within their employee base and placing them as CEOs and other members of management. That is the trend that I think that we see illustrated here, and which answers, I think it is hopefully a spot on in real way the question that you're asking. This is where a lot of that capital is going. So it's worth it to consider. Now here you see a license from Hummingbird Biosciences. You think creatively, there might be the potential where you see your particular enterprise on the rocks to go to a player that does this and is willing to do this, and see if there might be a way to do this type of licensing and so forth. And just closing us out, just know that, of course, some of the money is going into very promising companies that otherwise would have gone public. Really know the state of the IPO market and the public markets as you're mapping out your strategy, and be ready for a situation where you may need to line up capital for the long haul, even through your phase 3 studies and so forth. And with that, I will close out and turn it back to Van Lo. And thanks everyone again.
Hi, Jami. One more question for you from Purcell. He said, thanks, Jami. Really great content. We're working on a multi-omics diagnostics device paired to AI. What are your thoughts on the market's appetite for early stage companies in this area versus companies working on single modal diagnostics and AI tools?
Okay, well, everything that you described about your company and that question is music to my ears, because it's right in line with what a lot of investors are looking for and have expressed that they're looking for in this new AI environment. Diagnostics are considered lower risk than therapeutic plays, and multi-omics in particular has really proven itself out in important ways. Illumina Ventures would be a terrific place to start for you. Ron Mazumder there is absolutely amazing. Know Ron and his background backwards and forwards, know that his son played soccer, went to Princeton, etc. Really get to know these finite important details that comprise the contours of a particular investor and his mindset, and go for it. And I would also say be willing to engage prospective strategic partners early. Exact Sciences, for example, has an amazing head of business development who's who is looking for exactly what you described, at least in terms of bucket and category, know him really well, know that his wife on a vacation with just the two of them to Paris found a spot on her finger and months later had died of rare and aggressive skin cancer. That's been his motivating force behind all that he's done and all that he does at Exact. And that level of that sense of mission is something that you can align to as you approach him, and a sense of humility for him and everything that he's gone through as what for a long time a single father of 3 beautiful girls in Weston, Massachusetts. Know these details about every player in the space who might touch and bless your company with capital, and approach them accordingly in a customized way, and you can win.
Thank you. Yeah, it's if you don't mind me just speaking for a minute, I've had a chronic health condition that I was diagnosed with really early, so I kind of know what it's like. Partly know what it's like to have those kind of that emotional connection to being hospitalized, repeatedly, and with young children, and yeah, it's not a nice place to be, and it's part of the reason why I started doing what I was doing, but.
And
Yeah,
I think that deep connection,
yeah.
that's exactly where you start the conversation with him, right? And know those histories, going back to that know and be known, like know that, and you can connect in ways that are really important. And it also shows that you have a level of conviction. You're there because a deep experience drives you on a personal level. And that's exactly the kind of grit that investors want to see manifest in leaders that they decide to bet on. So it's hopefully that's, I mean, in some ways a parting illustration of hopefully that the depths to which you'll seek to know the holders of capital who can confer that capital on the work that you're doing and see you through to success.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jami.
Great. Okay, well, thanks again for having me. It was absolutely just wonderful. And it was wonderful to be part of this intimate group. And I wish you all the best. Again, I encourage you to reach out to me with any questions you have, or as you're thinking about, sort of where to put your yourself in proximity to others, what some of the better opportunities might be and how you might approach that, or some of those that you might reach out to instead of sort of throwing a dart blindly, really knowing where you can open a conversation successfully, and where there are those that are on the ready and who are looking for just what you might be able to offer. So Venlo, and I'll turn it back to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jami, for your insightful talk. We're over the hour, so I will let everyone go. Thank you, and we'll touch base next time.
Great. Thanks again, everyone. Take care and please stay in touch.
Thank you.